Hey YouTubers, Craig the Muskoka Painter. Today we're going to be looking at sanders, looking at some of the features and how to select a sander for a particular project. So we'll just get right into it. So these are the tools we'll be looking at today: a quarter sheet sander, an orbital sander, a belt sander, and a large disc sander. Some may even call that a grinder. So this is the quarter sheet sander, and we'll just take a closer look at that. Why do we call it a quarter sheet sander? Well, the base or the sanding surface is the size of a quarter of a sheet of sandpaper when it comes in sheet form. And so sometimes the sandpaper comes on roll form and doesn't fit very well in this application on this machine. They're good for pole sanders or what have you, but when we use these machines we want to use the sheet sandpaper, and so this is a quarter sheet, and what it does is it vibrates and goes from side to side motion. So unless you have some debris caught in the surface of your sandpaper, you should not have any swirl marks that tend to happen when we're using an orbital. And so when would we use a quarter sheet sander like this? Well, we'd use it on a small flat surface that would probably be difficult for an orbital to get to. Say maybe the wide part of window frames, and possibly window sills, shelving units perhaps. Anything that really doesn't work well for an orbital situation, we go to the quarter sheet sander, or sometimes known as a pond sander. How does it load up? Well, it's pretty easy really. It just has these friction fits, and they vary from model to model. But here's the spring-loaded version, and you just press down on those, and then you pull your sandpaper out, and then when you're ready you just replace the same way as it came out. Cut off a quarter sheet of your sandpaper, and away you go. Go to the store to buy these items. You're going to see a wide variety of all the models that we're looking at. But you need to be aware of some of these scenarios that may happen in the workplace. And so I'll show you the machine that I use and explain why. But then of course you're going to have to let your wallet be the guide. And as in most cases in our trade, you'll get what you pay for. But it's good to know what may come up on the job so that you're prepared. Next up is the orbital sander. And I use the rigid 4-inch sander. And with this you have two options. You have the hook and loop attachment system that I prefer, and you also have the adhesive system. The adhesive system you just put on this base, and you can adjust that by using these 4 screws. Also, while we're here, I'll just mention that with these orbital sanders, they're either a 4-screw or a 3-screw system. And so when you've established that, you can buy these replacement bases instead of buying a whole new machine once they get worn out. Especially with the hook and loop system, they tend to get worn out, and the hooks on the discs fail to grip to the base here, and so it's cheaper to replace this base than the whole sanding unit if it's running well. Some people like this adhesive system where they just peel the backing paper off and then they can just attach it to their base like so, and once it's worn out they just peel that off and do it again. I like the hook and loop system. So you can see how that works. Have your loops on the base and the hooks on the disc. You just apply some pressure to it and away you go. Now another thing about this unit is has the dust collector. That seems to be standard on most units, but a lot of these fail for some reason. They break apart. I guess they don't get emptied out near enough. You're supposed to probably empty it out once it gets about half full, and you never want to leave sawdust, especially like wood dust, and especially wood dust that has a urethane finish on it, in these bags overnight, because they could ignite and they could cause a fire. Now another nice feature about the rigid machine, especially this one, is the adjustable speed or the variable speed control. And this is really important if you're trying to eliminate swirl marks in your projects. Would you use the orbital sander? Well, if you have large areas that have to be sanded, especially if we're just prepping for paint, but we can use them if we're prepping for stain as well, if we're careful on the natural wood or natural timbers. But if we have extensive areas to do, this would be the model to use. If we were working on floors, we want to go to the at least, there's a 6-inch model, this is a 4-inch model. There's a 6-inch model that we can use for floors, or then we have to start going to floor equipment, specific floor sanding equipment that's much larger. But for general post and beams and paint work that isn't fine, like windows and door trims, say large baseboards for example, or perhaps flat spindles, if they're extensive in nature, we can use the orbital sander. The nature of this machine, it spins in random movements, and if you get some debris, you can see that there's actually some paint spots on here. But if you got urethane spots or what have you in there, it can cause scratches in the surface of your material. And so there's nothing much you can do about that. You have to make sure your discs are kept clean. But in some cases, if the discs are too coarse for the species of wood, the only way to avoid getting swirls is to adjust the speed. Is to use your speed adjustment. So it's nice to have that feature, especially if you're going to be doing some staining and you're doing some really high quality work on some wood finishes. So that's basically your features of the orbital sander.